All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It has been about 2 weeks since I've seen you guys last. So last week we took a break. I had some things that I had to handle IRL, so I was unable to stream last week. But this week we will continue kind of where we left off before. So thank you, Smudge. Appreciate the welcome back. So yeah, we basically are going to pick up where we left off before. It may take me a minute just to sort of get up to speed, but looking to hit the ground running this week and make some more progress with our scene stuff. So before I go any further with that, I do want to take just a quick second and just thank all of our supporters. Specifically starting with our partners. So that's Caden Parker, ARCA, Gerbolis Inc., Paul S., Super Awesome, and Wencheng. They are our partners, which is the highest tier of support on Patreon and YouTube memberships. I'd also like to thank all the other fine people on this screen for your support. I greatly appreciate that. Of course, all the funds from that support get rolled right back into what we have here on the channel in the form of equipment or licenses or whatnot. So I really do appreciate that. And of course, it should hopefully go without saying that I also support, or I appreciate rather, the support of each and every one of you viewers. Whether you're here live or watching on YouTube, I greatly appreciate the support and you guys being here and following along and interacting. It means a lot when you guys, sort of interact and let me know that this stuff is helping you out. So thank you for that. And on that same note, this is meant to be an interactive stream. So if you guys have questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to jump in the chat. I am watching the chat, as we continue here. So if you are on the YouTube recording of this, that'll be out there in a few weeks, then feel free to just leave a comment below. And of course, subscribe and all that good stuff. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and try and pick up where we left off. So I left myself a note here, a nice bright pink fix me. Handle the new create, init, load, unload, destroy paradigm we have set up for skyboxes. So, taking a look at that, it looks like I believe we did everything here that we need to do. I just need to actually call it. So that, I think, is what I'm going to go ahead and do now. So we have our create, which basically just takes a copy of the config, our initialize, which then sets up the cube map, some of that other stuff, generates the geometry config. The load is what actually takes GPU resources, sets up the texture, all that good stuff, and then unload and destroy are pretty self-explanatory. So it looks like we need to break this up into a couple different pieces. So we have our Skybox create, which right now it's bleating because we actually have some invalid stuff being passed to it. So it looks like the second parameter is correct, but the first one is looking for a Skybox config, which we do not have. So let's start there by creating that. So I'll call this SB config, and we will start by zeroing out the whole thing. And whoops. And all I think we need to do is we just need to set up the cube map name. So the cube map name is just going to be, I think it's Skybox cube is what we have. Let's double check the assets real quick, because I don't recall off the top of my head. Let's see. Skybox. Okay. So this cube map name, let me just verify that this actually goes to be used for what I think it does. Yeah, so it's used for this texture, which currently that would actually be wrong, so we need to fix that. So it's actually not Skybox cube. It's going to be looking at the assets here. Looks like it's just going to be Skybox, right? So we'll just call that Skybox. And then I think the other parameter here, or the other thing here, is just geometry config. which we're not actually going to set up. That's going to be created by the initialize for us. So we don't actually have to fill it out right now. We could just leave that as 0. So we'll go ahead and pass our SB config there. And that should do it for that. If you guys hear strange noises in the back, that's my cat playing with something in the background. So hopefully it's not too loud or disruptive. If it is, let me know and I'll pick it up. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is Skybox. We need to initialize. And all we have to do here is pass the Skybox. So we're going to pass the address of state Skybox. I believe that's also returning a Boolean, so we'll go ahead and check to make sure that that doesn't fail. And of course, we'll just put in this. Fail to initialize Skybox. All right, so that's the creation and the initialization happening in our application initialize. So I think it makes sense for that to happen there. All of our other geometry is also being initialized here, and it's geometry created here. But the load doesn't actually happen until much later, so I'm okay with doing that later. I think, so let's see, we have our initialize and then our update. So we don't actually have like a load in our application, right? Because our application doesn't necessarily have a load state, as it were. Our application should basically be loading a scene as we are sort of navigating throughout the game. So that could be triggered by anything, by like a mouse input from a menu action. It could be triggered by something within the world saying, hey, load up a scene, anything, right? And that will eventually trigger our Skybox to be loaded. So I think probably the way to do this is, for right now, I'm actually going to stick this in initialize. Because we don't actually have our scene being loaded or triggered by anything yet. And then when we actually set up our scene to load by some trigger, then we'll actually hook it in that way. So for right now, I'll go ahead and say Skybox load, and I'm going to put that here too. So the address of state Skybox, and of course we have to negative check that, and check the load, right? Failed to load Skybox. And I'm not going to worry about the unload or destroy for right now, because we'll hook those up when we actually start doing the scene loading and unloading, right? We just want to verify that our Skybox changes work so far. So I'm going to go ahead and build this. And it looks like we have an error here. Unknown type geometry config. So I guess I'm going to have to actually include that type, because we're not storing a pointer to it, which I'm not huge on, only because we kind of have 2 copies of it. I guess this gets thrown out, right? Okay, for now, I guess we'll go ahead and we'll pull this in. So that's in geometry system.h. So what's that under? Systems. So we'll include, oops, systems, geometry system. We've got some more errors. Oh, okay. So we haven't filled out our simple scene yet. And we're not actually doing any of this stuff yet. So just to make sure that our Skybox changes work, I'm just going to return true for all this stuff for right now. And then actually, after we're done converting our Skybox, we can actually come in here and start setting some of this stuff up. So this is the plan for tonight, is to get this guy filled out. Looks like I have one more foobar. Oh, I'm returning false here. That should just return. So it's not a Boolean return type. Cool. All right, so let's just verify we didn't bust anything, which we probably did. Oh, we didn't. Okay, surprise. I love when I'm surprised about things are actually working. But anyway, so we know our Skybox is working. And in fact, we probably are going to tie our scene load into the L key, right? So we have our unload happening here and our load happening. We probably are going to go ahead and tie that up into there, okay? Let's get rid of this. Get these things out of our way so we can see what we're doing. All right, so our Skybox, I think, is good for right now. Our test bed, for right now, I'm going to get rid of this fix me, because we've kind of done that. So now we can actually think about moving some of this stuff into our simple scene. And actually, we should probably set up our simple scene to take on this stuff. Let's see. When your code doesn't work and you don't know why is greater than when your code does work and you don't know why. Yeah, when your code does work and you don't know why and you're looking at it and you're convinced that it shouldn't be working, that's highly, highly alarming. Especially if it's in like any sort of financial software or something like that, right? Nothing is more alarming than something that works that doesn't look like it should. All right, so let's go ahead and go to simple scene and start filling some stuff out. So looks like we have our initialization complete as much as at least we can for right now. We have process configuration and setup hierarchy, which we can't really do yet. We have our simple scene load. Oh, sweet, my mouse battery just died. Off to a great start tonight, folks. Wireless mice. Love them until they die. All right, let me get this plugged in. All right. So, I guess at this point, the load, we can kind of handle that a little bit later. The update, all that stuff we can actually handle later. I think we should probably start taking a look at what is going to be involved in adding things like a skybox and a mesh. And then as we add these different types, we will remove the code out of our testbed main and move that over to a scene being loaded. And then, as we add each one of these types in here, we'll actually implement the load and unload and update for those things. I think that is what makes the most sense. So that's probably the way I'm going to go ahead and do it. So if we take a look at our simple scene, we already have our lists here of all of our different types. So that's good. All we need to do now is actually set those things up. So that is going to be done in simple scene create. Actually, it looks like our point lights, our meshes. Actually, it looks like we already did that too. Sweet. Okay, so I'm a little bit ahead of where I thought I was. You'll have to forgive me. Like I said, it's been about 2 weeks since I've looked at this code, so I have to sort of get back into the mindset here. So I guess at this point, let's go ahead and put in the logic for adding the skybox. So the first thing we'll obviously have to do is check to make sure the scene exists. So if it does not exist, obviously we return false. And if it does exist, then we're going to set our scene, in this case, skybox, to SB. And I think that's actually all we're going to need to do for adding a skybox. We could put a to-do note in here. To-do if one already exists, do we do any nothing with it. Right? I don't know. We'll figure that out. So that is adding the Skybox. Now, when we go ahead and add the Skybox, there's a couple of assumptions being made here. So when we add the Skybox, we assume that it's already been created. I think it is safe to assume... let's assume that it has not been initialized. Because... yeah, let's assume that it's not been initialized, right? So whenever we add a Skybox, or anything really, all we assume is that it's gone through the create process. And by doing that, that means that we can set up the configuration on the fly at any point. If we call this before we actually initialize the scene, then we can actually take care of its initialization process in here. Otherwise, if the scene is already initialized, we can go ahead and do that inline. So I guess the next thing we'll want to check is if scene state is greater than scene state. I guess we could say initialized, right? So if... what are you doing, kitty? All right. So if the scene has already been initialized, or it's further than that in the pipeline, then what we want to do is we will go ahead and initialize this inline, because that means that it's not going to get called by the simple scene initialize. So probably going to need the Skybox to be included here. So resources, Skybox. So now we can say Skybox initialize, and then we'll just pass through SB to make sure that that is initialized. And that is basically just going to happen in line, right? That should be relatively fast. I don't see that slowing things down by doing that here, okay? Of course, if that fails for some reason, we should probably also check that. So if this fails for any reason, we'll say k error Skybox failed to initialize. And we're going to return false, right? Because that's a failure to add that thing. And just to be safe, if it fails initialization, we're also going to set scene SB back to null. And that's just kind of a safeguard to keep us from, trying to use a Skybox that isn't actually going to load up properly. So, if and only if the scene is past the initialization stage, will we do that inline? Otherwise, we will do it up here. Now, one more thing we probably ought to check is loading, right? So we probably ought to go ahead and basically repeat this. So we'll say if it is past the loaded state, right? Sort of if it's past the loaded state, then we'll say Skybox load, right? Let's just say failed to load. And then, of course, if that fails once again, we'll set it to 0. So this way, whether we call simple scene add Skybox at the very beginning before we've initialized anything or anything like that, or we call it inline and sort of load it dynamically while everything's loading up, or we actually add it after the scene's already loaded, we're covered, right? So this should be good enough. All right. So that's adding our Skybox. And so with that, we should probably go in here to our populate render packet and add the Skybox to it. So let's say if not seen or not packet. We're going to return, whoops. We're going to return false. Otherwise, we are going to say packet. Which view do we want to actually put this in? That's a good question. So, because I don't know. So we have render view packet. I don't know if we have any type information available on that. This is in renderer types. So we have the view itself, some matrix information, geometry count, etc. So we probably ought to at this point figure out how to pass this to the Skybox view, right? Because that's ultimately what we're going to want to do. But we're going to need a little bit more information actually for this in order to do that. So one of the issues that we're going to run into here is that we have multiple views, right? So if we take a look at this views, right? We have a view count, right? And these views could be in any order because we define all that stuff here in our application. Let's see, where is it? Down here at the bottom, right? All this stuff. This is all of our view configuration, right? Which eventually is going to be split out to a text file. And so we have no way of knowing for sure at this level, at the simple scene level, what view index the Skybox is actually going to be using, right? So in this case, we know it's 1, but only because we configured it to be 1, or I should say 0, right? The first one. But only because we configured it to be so. And so if we probably ought to have something in the application or some way to tell the application which one of these is which. I'll have to think about that for a second. So we push our so the view itself might actually have the information we need. Let's see. We could go by the name, although that's kind of poopy. Actually, we do have a type. So we have our known types here, which thankfully the engine is going to know about the known types. So the known types are World UI, Skybox, and Pick. So this is actually how we're going to actually decide which one that is. So for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through the views to find the one that is the Skybox. And for right now, I'm going to do that in place here. We should probably be caching this index somewhere so we don't have to run this loop every single time. But for right now, I'm going to do it here. So to do cache this somewhere so that we don't have to check this every time, right? We're going to do for u32 I equals 0, I is less than packet view count plus I. Move this up here, change that to views sub I, check the type to say if that type equals, do I have this imported? Probably not. But let's go ahead and just copy pasta this, and that'll tell me. Renderer types, we might have to import that. We have resource types, but not renderer types. Okay. So include resources. Whoops, not resources, renderer types. All right. So if that is of type Skybox, we have the one we want, right? At this point, we will say Skybox let's see, how do we want to do this? So the test bed is actually, I think, just looping through these things. Which is not 100% sure that's the way we want to actually roll. Let me just refresh my memory here. So we have we're building our packets here. So actually, I guess we don't even really have to do this. Well, yeah, we do still need it. Okay, so this is probably the way we're going to do it. Skybox packet data. All right, I'm going to copy this and move it over here. This is ultimately what we're going to have to call, right? So instead of our Skybox data SB being there, we are going to say we want the scene Skybox. And then we go ahead and build the packet. We want the render view, right, which is here, which actually we technically don't need that because we actually have the view here. So let's do this. We'll say render view. View equals that, right? And then I can just say view type. And we have p frame data, frame allocator here. This first one is just going to take the view. Why is this bleating? Right, because we don't have frame data here, because that is on framedata.h, which is in core. So we need to include that. Include core frame data. All right. And packet views is actually going to be, I'm going to save this off as well. So we want to do, okay, I'll be right back. Then my cat just knocked a whole bunch of stuff over. What are you doing? Sorry about that. All right. So we have the render view packet. I'm just going to call this view packet. And that's going to be the address of packet views sub I. And then I can say view packet view for this guy, and then pass view packet here. Right? So that way we're not accessing things strangely by index. Hold on one second. Katie has been kicked out of the room. He's lost his office privileges. All right. Okay, so this should actually be, I believe, everything we need to do to populate our render packet for the Skybox. So we'll go ahead and save that. And I believe we can actually go ahead and start setting this stuff up. So the only thing I need to do is we need some way to track whether or not the Skybox has been initialized and or loaded. And I'm thinking that we probably ought to have some sort of state on it. Because if we load it, before this, right, or we add it before this, then we can go ahead and just, actually, we don't even need to check that here. The only place we'll need to check it is probably in the update, potentially. But not even really, because when we add it, it's going to handle it. So you know what? No, we don't even need to check it here. So the only thing that we actually need to do here is if scene Skybox, right? So if it exists at the time that this is called, then that means that it was added before the scene was initialized, in which case we can go ahead and do this, right? And this is going to be scene SB. Cool. All right. So that's the scene initialization. The scene load, we're going to just say that you probably should not be adding a Skybox between initialize and load. So let's see. So if not seen, first off, we have to return false. If scene Skybox, oops, scene Skybox, do we have anything in here that we could theoretically use to determine if we have, if we've loaded this or not? Probably instance ID. Because I think that's going to be invalid ID. Let me find our references. So I'm pretty sure if we don't have an instance ID, that it's safe to say it's not loaded. Yeah, because it's invalid ID when it's unloaded. Yeah, so we can look at the instance ID. That's probably a safe enough way to look at it. I could put an additional flag on there, but when we have something we can clearly look at to say whether or not this thing is loaded, we might as well just use that, right? So if the instance ID equals invalid ID, then that means we need to actually load it. So in that case, we will go ahead and do the same thing as we have down here. Right there. And this will be scene SB. Okay. All right. So I think that is at least our Skybox hooked up in our simple scene. So the next thing we should probably do is include simple scene in our sort of test bed here. This is under resources, right? Yeah. So I think I might include this under the temp section for now. Resources, simple scene. I may wind up moving this to somewhere more permanent because this is sort of our game logic, and I can't see us sort of changing that out. especially in testbed. It's probably not going to be temporary, but whatever. It doesn't matter. So we have our application boot, our application initialize. This is probably where we should be creating the scene stuff, right? So even right here, like we have our game state here, temp load and prepare stuff. And then this is kind of where we're doing all of this. So let's go ahead and add something to our testbed game state. We'll add a simple scene here, which actually means that I'm going to have to add this to... Yeah, this is fine, because this is just our testbed. So again, include resources simple scene, and yeah, I guess we could put it here. Maybe not. Let's put it actually, let's go up here next to all this other stuff. So we have our Skybox here. Let's put our simple scene main scene right there. And then here, right after we create the state, we will say state main scene. And our simple scene, I forget, does that take a pointer? It does. Let's see. So the config we're largely ignoring for right now, so I'll pass 0 for that. So we'll say simple scene create. We're going to pass 0 for the config. We're going to pass the address of the main scene. And then, of course, we will check that result. And kerror failed to create main scene. All right, and we'll return false. All right. Go away. Okay. So here's our scene creation. So a little bit further down, this is where we have the Skybox config. And so all we need to actually do is copy this section of code here. So we'll go scene, simple scene create, add objects to scene, right? So here is our Skybox. So we'll go ahead and set that up. We'll call simple scene add Skybox, and we'll pass the address of state main scene and the Skybox itself, which is going to be the address of state SB. Okay. Of course, we also have to negative check that. So in production code, this is all going to be, more streamlined and driven by configuration. So, we're not going to have all this checking code all over the place eventually once we actually get this streamlined. But for now, this is kind of how we're going to have to do it, just to make sure that everything, gets added and whatnot successfully. So we'll say failed to add Skybox to main scene. Aborting game. Which I guess we don't really have to abort for that, but I'm going to. I don't know why it keeps opening that. TNT Master, I'm late. How are you doing? Don't worry about being late. No worries at all. I'm doing great. I'm a little rusty tonight just because I haven't touched this stuff in a couple weeks. But I'm doing pretty well. Allergies have been absolutely kicking my butt, so I'm also doped up on allergy meds, which is great. It's probably giving me a little bit of brain fog up here as well. But other than that, can't complain. Yeah, allergies are the worst. Yeah, I'm on 2 different medications every day, and then I take a third one when it flares up. And then sometimes I also have to use like nose sprays and stuff on top of it. So yeah, it gets a little intense. All right. So we've created our scene. We have added the Skybox to the scene. we have gone ahead and well, we've created the Skybox, then added it to our scene, which is going to go ahead and take care of this and this potentially. So, in fact, we actually need to get rid of this as well. Okay, so the next thing is going to be probably should go ahead and load up our scene, right? Should we load our scene here? I'm gonna say no. Night Lone, how's it going? Good to see you. Welcome, welcome. Stranger indeed, yeah. I know. I was actually out of town all last week, so been playing catch up. Alright, you know what? Actually, I'm gonna put a fix me here. Move this to load key binding. I am going to load the scene here. And the reason I am doing that is because all this other stuff is in here, and there's some of our update code actually kind of relies on some of this stuff being loaded. And so I think until I move everything over, I'm probably just going to hold off on any of it, right? In terms of the yeah, fix me everything. Yep, pretty much, you know, just Control A backspace, right? So, with that, let's do simple scene load. Whoops. And of course, it's going to take the state main scene. This, of course, also has a check for success, so let's go ahead and check that. I'm going to copy pasta this section. Failed to load main scene boarding game, right? So we'll go ahead and load the scene here, but we are going to eventually move that out of here to a key binding, and we will actually load up the entire scene on a key binding once we actually get the rest of this stuff moved over. All right, I think I want to say that's most of what we have to do. There is one other change that we have to do, which is actually in our application update. So we have all of our, actually it might be the render, not the update, it's the render. Here we are generating our packet data for our Skybox. We don't want to do that anymore, right? That has been moved to our scene. So instead, we actually want to call simple scene, what did I call that? Populate render packet. Okay, and this takes the address of state main scene, takes the frame data, which we should already have, so p frame data, and then the render packet itself, which is also passed to us, so we can just pass that along. And of course, we'll do a check for this as well. If that fails, then we need to bleat about it. So we'll just say failed to populate render packet for main scene. Right? And then as we move the other stuff over, like the world stuff, then we'll go ahead and snip this out of here. So actually the world is going to probably take care of most of the rest of it. A lot of the rest of this stuff is actually for UI stuff, which we're going to put in place when we actually have a UI system. So some of those hacks are going to have to stay in place. But for now, I think that's it. So let's build, find out. How is your input handling? Do you have it? Yes, I do have input handling. You mean like keyboard and mouse? Yes. I haven't done gamepad yet, but I do have keyboard and mouse. What did I forget? Let's see. Oh, is it bleating about it not being? Yep. Const. Oh, but this is probably not taking a const, is it? Oh, we don't even have that. Oh, what a dingus. Okay. Render view system build packet. So I need include systems render view system. I still missed some stuff. Wow, what is all of this? Wow, what happened there? VS Code, do you be tripping? I think so. Okay. Yeah, keyboard and mouse. Yeah, I have input for all that stuff. Input handling for all that. Yeah. It's cross-platform too, so it's handled on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Can't say I'm surprised this failed. But why? So, what are we missing? Let's see. I'm going to go off again, but you might want to check Discord, specifically my server. Yes, I will do that either later tonight or more likely probably tomorrow. But yes, I will check. So thank you for logging in and joining us here. Appreciate it. All right. So the view is null, which is why this isn't working. Gotta make sure you're healthier than me. Yeah, well, you know. I don't know about all that, but sure. We'll go with that. Let's see. Debug. Let's just have a look at the call stack here. So the packet views. Oh, right. Yeah, okay. So at this point, basically what's happening here is the view isn't populated, right, on the packet because we just generated the packet here. We're populating it here. The issue with that is that this packet that we're passing through does not yet have a reference to the actual view that is created on it, which is awesome. And thus it's not able to get a type from that. So, we're grabbing the render view packet and then looking at the packet view and then the view type, right? If we don't have this, we're not gonna be able to get this. So what is the best way to do that? Because the thing is, we could do this render view system get. I think that's what I'm gonna have to do for now. I don't like it, but I think for now that's what I have to do. So instead of using view, I'm going to have to do this. Oh, actually, I think I need that. I need the view packet. Right. So we know this, for example, is for the Skybox, which completely throws out the need to actually do this check. So let's get rid of it. All right. Oh wait, no, it doesn't. Because I have to go through each one of these. What am I doing? All right. So I should put this up here. And then Wait a minute. That's not going to work either. Because I actually don't know which one of these to use without that type. So that's not going to work either. So let me put that back. And I guess I need to actually go back to here. So before we were adding this to the 0th index. So basically what we have to do is this. And I don't like that because obviously that's assuming a lot of information, which I guess the application knows. Let me see if there's a way down here I can tell. It's going to be much further down than that. Further down, further down. Much further down. So we have the render view config. That is part of application config. So theoretically, we could look at that to not have to go by names. Because this is what I'm trying to avoid. Really, we should really be using this. So these render configs, let's see. Skybox config passes config render views. So our config actually holds an array of these render views. So we could actually look at that, assuming we have the application config at that level, and use that instead. It's going to be down here. So problem is the application has this, but the simple scene wouldn't have access to that configuration. Okay, I'm going to put a pin in this for right now. And we'll come back to it, right? So for now, I'm just going to basically just going to hard code this stuff, right? So what do? We do Skybox, then world, then UI, and then UI pick. Right, so here is here's the world. The Skybox is encapsulated in here, so that's the world. This is all the UI, basically. And then the pick is done here. All right, so I guess I'll just kind of repeat this same pattern. Okay, so we'll do UI, and then the last one I think was just called pick. Let's see, where is that? Yeah, it's just pick. So pick, and then we'll set these indices 1, 2, 3. This is a super poopy way to do it, but it should solve the problem. All right, so it looks like we've gotten a little bit further, but we do not have something we need to set a uniform. So what is the issue here? Null pointer of some sort. So instance ID. Let's kind of walk up the stack here. Render view system on render. Right. Okay, so render draw frame. So theoretically, this would have happened after our Skybox has already been set up, right? Okay. Well, all right, there's part of the problem. Oh, I think I see the problem. So, it looks like the load never got called, right? Because we have a, well, our texture map isn't even set up correctly, right? Our geometry configuration is null. The config is here. The geometry config is not here. So we must have forgotten that somewhere. So let's go back to simple scene. So we have Skybox load. Did we have anything in our test bed having to do with geometry? Probably would have been up here. Here's lights. Meshes. No, doesn't look like it. I thought we moved all that stuff over to the Skybox creation. In fact, we have, right? So here's where we acquire our resources. Generate cube config. Let's see. Here's where we acquire our geometry. So I wonder if this stuff is just not being called. So I'm going to actually put some breakpoints in here and launch again. Never got called. Okay, so where are we going wrong here? So our testbed main, we do the simple scene create, Skybox create, add Skybox. Oh, we didn't initialize. That's the problem. We skipped a step. So the initialize actually needs to happen here. Right, so this should be initialize. Initialize, right? And I think all that needs is the simple scene. All right, so I think that's the missing step, right? Because we didn't generate the geometry to. Whoa, what happened here? I must be hitting some weird key combo tonight by accident. All right, so let's see if this runs now. Okay, so we have our initialize. I'm just going to assume that's going to work for right now. All right, so we got somewhat further, but our initialize breakpoint got hit, but our load never did. So let's go back to our simple scene. Simple scene load. Right, we can't go by instance ID because initialize is doing that for us, I think. Right, so initialize. Well, no, actually. Because we're acquiring resources here. Okay. Let's put a breakpoint here and here. Okay. So if CMSB, so the instance ID for here is 0. Why would that be the case? I guess we're not initializing it to that. We're not initializing it to... Yeah, we're not. Okay. So this needs to be SB instance ID equals invalid ID. That was not being initialized properly. So it was thinking it was already loaded. There we go. Now we'll have Skybox load. Right? We acquire the resources, acquire the cube texture, geometry, shader, texture maps, all that good stuff. So let's continue. And there we are. So we are back to having a loaded scene, and it looks like our Skybox is oriented correctly and everything else. So that is good. We are apparently not releasing some stuff here, but okay, we'll come back to that. All right, so that's the first hurdle, is sort of getting something in our scene up and running. So the next thing that we're going to do is focus on probably meshes. I'm thinking is going to be the next thing that we're going to move over. Yeah, I suppose we could use do meshes, and then probably the directional light and then point lights. So meshes. Meshes are basically going to be, it's going to follow a similar process to Skybox. And that's why I kind of chose the Skybox first. The only difference is going to be that obviously it's going to be a list of them instead of just one. So I guess let's go ahead and... Oh, you know what? We didn't handle the remove Skybox. I suppose we can handle removing later, though. All right. Add mesh is going to be right here. So first thing we have to check is if not seen or not M, right? Turn false. Okay. We don't have a maximum on meshes, and I think I'm actually doing this as a D array. We are. So all we have to do is just add it to that list, essentially. Which I think I'm not actually going to do until we've confirmed that it can be loaded and whatnot, right? So I'm actually going to copy this logic here. Because we need to track state in a similar way. So if we are already beyond the initialized state, then we need to do that in line. So I guess that means that we're going to have to start looking at our meshes, which I don't think our meshes actually do any sort of initialization. I think it's just loading with those guys. right? Load from resource, basically. And then we spit out the mesh. So this we're actually using our job system for. So we kick off a job for this. We use our resource system load to load up a specific mesh. And then this result is copied over, and then we use that later on. So resource system load, resource type mesh, we load our mesh using our mesh loader. Okay, not a whole lot of craziness there. It's just, this is basically sort of a wrapper for the job system doing its thing. All right. So if we load from resource, then that means we're going to need to know what that resource name is somehow. So if we take a look at the mesh struct itself, we have unique ID, generation, geometry count, our array of geometries, and a transform. We have nothing here as to where this actually came from or how it got stood up, no configuration. But if we look at, what was that? Skybox, right? The Skybox actually holds its config. In our case, the Skybox config is pretty lightweight. It's just geometry config and cube map name. And the other thing is there's a couple ways that we can actually create meshes. So we can create mesh. We can create a mesh by loading it from a resource, like we're doing here. Or we can create it from geometry, which we're doing, let's see where, here. So we basically need a way to handle either one of these and have that be wrapped up in a configuration step or an initialization step. And I don't think, like, this is all we have for our mesh, right? So we're actually going to have to implement this paradigm here too, which is our create, initialize, load, unload, destroy. So we're actually going to have to do that first. And then we can jump back to the simple scene stuff. Which is unfortunate. But that's part of the reason that I'm not adding too many more features before we actually got to this, right? Because we want everything to sort of work in a pretty uniform way. So mesh, we have mesh load from resource. And we probably ought to rename this, right? Or actually privatize this, really. So I'm thinking the first thing that we need to do is actually go over to mesh itself and create a mesh config. Struct mesh config. And to that mesh config, we will have a resource name, right? So we'll have a resource name if we want to load from resource. We will have, I think Skybox itself had geometry config. So let's probably stick to this pattern, right? So we'll have a U16 geometry count, and then an array of geometry configs, a D array. Actually, I don't know if that needs to be a D array. Probably not, because we're going to know the count. So the mesh config, oops, we'll go here, we'll call it config. And this will either work, we can either configure a resource name or a geometry count and geometry configs. So if we want to do it in code, this is how we do it. If we want to load it via config or from an already existing resource, we'd load it this way. I think that's going to be how we encapsulate both versions of this, right? So that means that we have a couple new methods here. I'm going to create them all down here. So B8 mesh create, right? And this is going to take a mesh config, and it's also going to take a pointer to save the mesh in, right? We also will have a mesh initialize, which is just going to take a pointer to a mesh load, right? Mesh unload, which is this guy here. Do we want to have the possibility of failing there? Did we do that for our Skybox? Yeah, we did. Okay, so let's change this to a B8 as well. And then KPI B8 mesh destroy, and then pointer to a mesh. All right, so this is our new interface for meshes. And I think we'll probably make this private and not allow this to be called anymore. And we'll require it to go through this interface. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. And then I guess let's go ahead and copy this and go to mesh.c. And mesh load from resource. Mesh unload. Let's put all of this down here. Mesh unload. This is actually just going to get moved, so we'll just put this here. We don't need these KPIs here. All right, let's go ahead and convert all these things. All right, so in this case, we're just going to always return true, right? Actually, no. We'll return false. Whoops. If there is no mesh, right? Okay, so that's unload. That's easy. Mesh create. All we're going to do is say if not out mesh, return false. Otherwise, out mesh config equals config, return true, right? We may need to do some additional stuff in there. I suppose we could zero the memory, so it's K0 memory. Out mesh, and then size of mesh. Move this up here so that we don't wipe out what we just assigned. Right, so we could do that. And I think that really covers it for create. Okay, so that's fine. Obviously for this one, if not mesh, turn false. Here is where we process the configuration, right? So this is going to be an example of something where we actually have configuration that we can process. So we'll say if m.config.resource name. So if we have a resource name, then we will go ahead and load from resource, which this is no longer public. So I'm going to mark this as static, and we'll call mesh load from resource. Oh wait, we don't want to load it from resource. All we want to do here is return true, because there's no setup to actually be done there. Right, so actually what we need to do is the real difference is going to be here in load. We do have some stuff to do in initialize, but let's handle this case first. So if not mesh, return false, and then if m.config resource name, return mesh load from resource, m.config resource name, and then we'll say out mesh is just going to be m, right? And that will actually handle that case. Otherwise, we actually need to handle some stuff manually. So that's going to be in the else cases for both of these guys. So for initialize, if we do not have a resource name, then we must have at least one config, geometry config, right? So geometry configs has to exist, right? So if not geometry configs, return false, right? Otherwise, for each geometry config that we have, actually, let me take a quick look at this. So generating the cube config would be here. This is the geometry config. So we would do this while we're creating the mesh. So the initialization wouldn't necessarily need to do anything else, I don't think. Geometry system acquire from config. This is the actual geometry itself. I'm pretty sure this actually creates... This actually creates the geometry in the renderer. Okay, so that is a load. So actually, this is more of just a verification step, right? The load is really where that's going to make a difference. So, what we'll do here is we'll loop through each one of these things. So for u32 I equals 0, I is less than m config geometry count plus plus I. And then for each one of these, we'll basically do this, essentially. So we'll go back to mesh. Oops. And then, let's see. There is actually one more thing we could do up here. So geometries at this point, or geometry count, and geometries is actually going to be empty. So let's copy over this config geometry count, and geometries is equal to, does this need to be a D-array? I don't think so. Is equal to kallocate size of geometry pointer, because this is a array of pointers. Mem tag array. Right, so we'll set that up here. That way here, all we have to do in the load is just iterate by index. So we'll have mesh geometries sub I, and then we'll say mesh config gconfigs sub I. That we can get rid of. Cube mesh generation. So this is going to be M generation, right? Acquire ID, that's going to be M, and then dispose. So we want to clean up the geometry config at this point. I feel like we probably shouldn't do that here. I feel like we should probably do that in the unload. Right? This is what it's going to be. But I feel like we should definitely do that at a different time. I'll go ahead and do it for now, but do this during unload destroy. Right? All right, so we'll load up the geometries that way. And that should automatically grab all these instances and stuff like that. So that should be fine. Okay, yeah, I think that's actually all we need to do for load. I think. We'll find out. So, the next thing that we have is mesh unload. That's actually already done. And then mesh destroy. So this, if not mesh, obviously return false. How do we check to see if this is loaded? Because we could have multiple geometries, some of which are loaded, some of which are not. I suppose, though, if we unload the mesh, let's see. So the geometries is going to be 0 if it's unloaded. So I guess we could just look at that. That should be sufficient. If mesh geometries, right? Then we know that we're loaded, so we will mesh unload mesh, right? I guess we should probably check to see if this fails. Okay, error. Mesh destroy. Failed to unload mesh. Return false. Not much to do about it, but if it happens, it happens. Some of this stuff is actually kind of more of a destroy than an unload. Because this is kind of this is the unload and this is kind of a destroy. But I think for now I'm just going to kind of leave that as is. All right, so that's destroy, unload, load, initialize, create. I think we might be good to go in terms of that. So now we just need to convert our logic in our test bed to work with this. So let's see. We're going to have to use... We're going to have to put that stuff here, right? So what we really want to do is we want all of this, essentially, for each one of these things. Right, so I'm just going to comment these out as I go. So right here, we're going to go ahead and, let's see, we had a mesh count thing here before. Pretty sure that's starting off at 0, right? Mesh count is 0. You know what? I'm going to do away with that too. Because we don't need it anymore. So I'm just going to say this is index 0. Cube mesh. Let's see, our mesh is here. So we're setting up our geometries. Isn't that something that we're already doing in mesh now, though? Is our mesh actually... Our mesh is actually handling this in initialize, so we don't actually need that code anymore either. Oh, this was actually wrong. This is using size of mesh pointer. Well, it's wrong, but not wrong. There should have been a geometry pointer instead of a mesh pointer. So that, okay, well, you know what? Goodbye. So we generate our cube config. We are going to set up a mesh config, which we'll call cube 0 config. Right, and we'll set that up this way. And then we'll say cube 0 config. Geometry count is going to be 1. And then cube config geometries. Oops. Geometry configs, rather. This is going to be an array of these geometry configs. So we'll say kallocate size of geometry config times, I'm just going to say 1 mem tag array. All right, so we'll set that up. Then we'll say configs sub 0 is equal to that cube config. And then let's see, cube mesh transform. All right, so we have the transform here with the test material and all of that. And then we have the cube mesh itself, which is fine, I guess. I think I'm going to do mesh create, and then cube 0 config, and then I'm going to pass this. And then obviously if that fails for some reason, we need to catch that. So k error failed to create mesh for cube 0. Good enough. Turn false. All right, so we grab that cube mesh. In fact, we can just, let's just do this instead of grabbing a pointer to it, right? Let's just set the transform like that. So we create the mesh, we create the config, we create the mesh, and then we go ahead and simple scene add mesh, address of state main scene, and then struct mesh. The mesh is going to be this guy one more time. Right? And this is the steps to basically create that and add it to the scene. And then, of course, it'd be initialized and loaded. Hey, Norlin, no worries. I appreciate the lurk. Thank you. Appreciate the support. Yeah, we're actually we're not too far from being done for the night. Actually, we're making some good progress, but you know, it is what it is. It's the middle of the week, so I can't go too late here. All right. So we have geometry system config dispose. Didn't I do that in here as well? Yes, we did. So this can go bye-bye. That's gone too. All right, so that's the first cube. Second cube should be largely the same thing. The only difference is the transform and its size and name and some of that other stuff. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of grab this section of code here and kill. Whoops, we also have the parent that we need to do. Yeah, so I'm going to grab this section of code because that's got all the different stuff in it I need, and kill this. And go up here to where we added the first cube and add a second cube. Second cube, right? And this is just sort of reference for me here. So all I'm going to do is copy this and put it here. So this is going to be cube 1 config. And that's it for that. Okay. Geometry count 1. So we have that. We need the cube config here, right? This is going to be meshes sub 1, meshes sub 1, meshes sub 1. The transform we're going to create from position, so that's not going to be identity. And then the transform set parent, we will need to also make sure to set that as well. So I'll do that right here before we actually add the mesh. Because parenting is something that we're actually going to have to sort out in a bit. I think that's everything, so I'll comment that out for a second. So this is going to be cube mesh 2, which is going to be this guy. So we'll just say that dot transform. And then this is going to be the first one dot transform. And I believe we just passed pointers there, and that should be all good. So that is that. So we get our parenting set up, we add the mesh. All right, and then we have the third cube, which again is going to be mostly the same stuff except for the parenting bits and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'll come in here to, where was it? Why have I lost it all of a sudden? Here. Okay. third cube. So we can see some examples here on how to add these things in code. I kind of want to keep these examples just because this is going to be something that we're definitely going to want to do, you know, as we're testing stuff. So I'll go ahead and copy this whole section here. And then let's get rid of this terminal. And then we'll basically just replace the relevant parts like we did before. So we've got that. We want configs sub 2 this time. Whoops, not config sub 2, meshes sub 2. Meshes sub 2, meshes sub 2. We are going to create from a different position. We are going to set the parent. This is going to be, that should be sub 2 and sub 1, which means I messed up the previous one. Nope, I didn't. Okay. And then add mesh, this is going to be sub 2. Okay. We can get rid of this. All right. So we have our cubes added to the scene, which means that we have to go down here. And for right now, I'm going to leave these things as is, because these two are going to be treated a little bit specially. So this is going to be sub 3 though, and this is going to be sub 4. And I think that's all we need to do within here to actually have this stand up the right way. So let's go ahead and build. And I'm guessing we forgot to include somewhere. So geometry config. You know what? I'm gonna forward declare this. There's no need to add another include here. Okay. Yep, forgot to return true here. So I don't think there's any way that we can fail this. So return true. Just do that. Implicit identifier. Right, because we need the identifier. So include core identifier. This can actually go up here. We forgot to return somewhere else again. So once all of this is done, we can return true here. Do we have, what is this bleating about? Oh, again. Oh, right, because we converted this. Return true. Okay. Mesh count is no longer a thing. Oh, did I forget to rename this? So cube 0 config, cube 1 config. This should be cube 2 config. This is where copy pasta gets you every time. All right, another implicit declaration. Mesh load from resource. Right. So we're not going to be able to do this anymore. So we actually need to implement the other half of this, which is fine. So all we have to do here is mesh config, Vulkan config. All right, we'll just zero this out. Falcon config dot resource name. This is going to be a lot easier to set up than the other way of doing it. Far less manual. That. And then we can say all we should have to do technically is do a mesh create, where we do a the config actually needs to come first. Falcon config, and then out mesh, which is just going to be car mesh, which I think is already a pointer. It is, right? So I guess we'll just say if not this. Okay, error. Failed to create Falcon mesh, right? And that's fine, right? Otherwise, if we do not have an error, why is this bleating? Oh, it's IntelliSense tripping. Okay. So if the mesh create is successful, then we can say simple scene add mesh. This is going to be with address of state main scene, and then state car mesh, right? And if that fails, oops, then we'll bleat about it, but we're still not going to do anything about it, right? So fail to load Falcon mesh. Okay. So that's the new flow for that. Right, so here's the Falcon. And then we'll just comment that one out. And then the Sponza. Right, so we're actually just going to follow this same exact pattern. So we can comment that out. This is going to be Sponza. Sponza config. Right. Spons mesh. Right. This is going to be the errors for that. And that should work with the new flow, hopefully. All right. So let me just verify in simple scene. Yeah, I was thinking so. So we haven't actually hooked up everything we need to in simple scene. So we've made everything sort of match our new API, but we actually have to hook this stuff up here. So if the scene state is beyond initialized, then we need to say mesh. Oh, we don't have. I think it's include resources mesh. Oops. Right. Mesh initialize. And that's going to be M. Mesh failed to initialize, right? And then instead of setting this directly, we need to push it to our D array. So first of all, here we're not going to set anything to we're not going to set anything to 0, right? We're only going to set something on the success case, which is down here. So if we can initialize the mesh, then we're going to go ahead and save it into our array. So D array push, and we're going to say the scene. Oops, scene. Right. We have pending meshes and meshes. I forgot about the pending mesh thing. We may or may not need the pending meshes. I'm going to try and do it without it for right now and see how far we can get. So the value is going to be M. Okay. So we'll just push that onto the array, and we're good to go. We're going to do the same thing if we are already beyond the loaded state here. So Skybox load is going to be replaced with mesh load. That's going to be M. Mesh failed load. We're not going to do that there. But in the success case, we'll go ahead and actually, we should probably only push this. We should probably only push that. No, we should push it here. In fact, we should push it here. And I say that because we just want to basically loop through this array to load, or to initialize and load. And so I guess actually we should push it here. If everything is successful, then we push it. Or if these things don't happen, then we push it. Yeah, I'm good with that. All right, so let's copy this. Let's go to load. Actually, we'll start with initialize. So we're going to first check. At this point, we're basically going to load everything, right? Or we're going to initialize everything. So we don't need to check to see if that array exists because we know that it's already been stood up. So now we can just say for u32i equals 0, I is less than scene meshes, and I actually need to get the count of that. So u32 mesh count equals d array length scene meshes. So this is mesh count plus I mesh initialize scene meshes sub I. We're going to need let's see. Yeah, we are keeping a pointer to that. That might wind up being an issue. We'll see. So if not mesh initialize, then I guess we'll just say mesh failed to initialize and return false. I don't know that we necessarily want to be returning false whenever a mesh fails to load. We may want to reverse that and just allow it, just kind of move on. Maybe remove it from the list and move on. I don't know. Okay. So we're actually going to follow the same exact pattern for loading. So I'm actually just going to copy this, delete this, come down here to load after Skybox, and just change this to load. And then load. Right? Okay, so there's that. Populate render packet. This is kind of the poopy part, because we're going to have to loop like this every single time. On every single frame. I'm not really happy about that. Gonna have to definitely change that, but I'm going to do that anyway for right now. Because I just want to see if this works tonight. I suspect it's not going to. I think there's some more work that we're going to have to do. But, you know, it might be neat if it unexpectedly works. So, Oh, you know what? This is Okay, so this is not going to be something that I'm going to be able to finish tonight. I could, but there is this whole issue here of our frustum culling and all that stuff. That needs to be managed by the scene. That should not be here. And that stuff really needs to be moved. And the draw count, let's see. So we're pushing the world geometries into the frame data. Right. So here's our world geometry. So we have to actually do this step too. So our frustum culling is basically what I'm looking at right now. And our frustum culling is actually a pretty important step that we need to actually do as part of this step in populating the render packet. So that's going to take, I think it's just moving the code over, but I'm not 100% sure, and I don't think it's going to run right off the bat. In fact, I could probably, whoops, why does it keep doing that? So this builds, but I suspect it's not going to run. No, it does run, but we got snow meshes. And that is because we are not properly hooking up everything that we need to hook up in the packet itself. So given the time, this is probably where I'm going to have to end the stream. I may or may not be able to stream tomorrow. I'd really like to stream tomorrow to sort of get all this stuff done, but we'll kind of see where we wind up. So, oh, hey, Residor. You kind of caught me at the end of the stream. So basically what we've been doing is just kind of refactoring some of our I'll say our resources to work with a scene that we've been standing up. We've got this simple scene that we've been working on, and we finished our refactor of skyboxes, and now we've mostly finished our refactor of meshes, and we just need to make that play nice with our simple scene, so that we can, as we add these things to our scene, we can just see them pop up and render. And I think we got like 90% of the way. The last step of that is for the scene to sort of grab up all the stuff that we actually have to render, populate our render packet with it, to be then thrown over to the renderer to be rendered. But there are some things that are involved in that we haven't hooked up yet, that are still sort of in our testbed code that really shouldn't be. So that is our frustum culling for one thing, which that ultimately decides the list of geometries that gets sent over in our render packet to be rendered. So with that, I'm probably going to go ahead and cut this off here, and next stream, we'll go ahead and hook that up, get our lights over, so that's our directional and our point lights. We'll get those properly added with our scene as well. And then at that point, we can actually start playing around with maybe loading and unloading multiple scenes and trying to play around with that a little bit. And then we'll start to have something that feels a little bit more like a game that you can actually play, right? Like where you can load and unload different levels. And we'll get those things so that they're configurable, so that we can actually have configuration behind those things instead of having to hard code everything like we're doing here. So yeah, I think that's where we're gonna end. We made some decent progress tonight, so definitely good stuff. To think C code could actually look so organized, I'm in awe. I don't know if I would call this organized yet, right? I mean, it's parts of it are, but there are parts of it that, because I'm moving stuff around, are super messy right now. But yeah, I'm trying to kind of keep it organized, and I'm trying to stop it along the way every once in a while and sort of reorganize things as I go. But yeah, cool. So I think if memory serves, I think I'm on a feature branch for this. Yeah, simple scenes. So I'm gonna go ahead and push this code up to that branch so that you guys can kind of at least have the most recent code, and it won't break the main branch, right? So I guess I'll say work in progress scenes, converted skyboxes and meshes to new API. Need to finish view packet generation. Cool. Pushed. So, no, stop it. Stupid Windows. All right. So, anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys following along and interacting with the channel as it continues. Like I said, I will maybe be streaming tomorrow night. I'm not 100% sure yet if I'm going to. We'll see. But yeah, that's and in fact, I'm actually really tired tonight, so I don't even think I'm going to be raiding anybody tonight, quite honestly. Let's see who all. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to raid anybody tonight. Yeah, I'm too tired. I think I'm just going to end the stream. All right. Chim Chim Charu. Good night. Smudge. See you later. I'll catch you guys next time. All right. Peace.